My name is Rachel Linwood. I'm 20 years old, and this morning I watched the sunrise with a pack of wild wolves. It was the most peaceful moment I've felt in years. But just hours later, my father shattered that peace, along with my camera. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "You want to chase animals for a living? Then get out of my house." So I did. Before I tell you how I got here, and why I walked away from the only family I've ever known, leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to walk away from someone you love to protect your peace, you're not alone. The morning light was soft, like it had something to say but didn't want to speak too loudly. I crouched low behind a ridge, my camera steady in my hands, breath held. Just 20 feet ahead, a mother wolf stretched, nuzzled her pups, and turned her snout toward the wind. One click, just one, captured that entire moment. The trust in her eyes, the wilderness behind her, the softness of being wild and the power of surviving. I felt whole. I always do when I'm up here, far from voices that try to reshape me into someone I'm not. The forest doesn't care that I didn't go to business school. The wind never asks why I'm not more like my brother. And the wolves? They don't question my dreams. They just run. By the time I got home, I was muddy, windswept, and buzzing with life. I could already see the shot in my head, the curve of her body against the rising sun. I couldn't wait to edit it, maybe even post it on Wild Spirit, my little photography page. But as soon as I stepped into the kitchen, the air changed. It always does. "Why do you smell like you've been rolling in a barn?" my father asked, flipping the newspaper down without looking up. My mother glanced at me with that quiet, tired look she always wore around him, like she wanted to say something but had already decided not to. Danny, my younger brother, didn't even acknowledge me. He was too busy talking about his new internship, another one Dad had pulled strings for. "I was out shooting," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Got some beautiful shots this morning." Dad snorted. "You mean wasting your time stalking wild animals with that toy camera?" "It's not a toy," I said quietly. "It's work, real work." He looked up at me then. Really looked. That cold accountant stare I've known my whole life. "Real work? You think crawling around in the dirt chasing mutts is a career? Rachel, don't be ridiculous." Danny laughed under his breath. "Maybe if you spent less time in the woods, you'd have an actual job by now." The blood rushed to my face. I set my camera down gently on the counter, reminding myself not to react. I'd been through this before. Same lines, same tone, same ache, but this time, I pushed back. "Just because it doesn't fit into your idea of success doesn't mean it's worthless," I said. "Nature photography is real, and I'm good at it." The silence that followed was sharp. Dad stood up slowly, walked over to where I'd placed the camera, and stared at it for a moment. Then, without warning, he picked it up and slammed it to the floor. The crunch of plastic and glass felt louder than anything anyone had ever said to me. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I just stood there, staring at the pieces of the thing I'd built with months of saving, hours of work, and years of hope. "You want to live like a fool," he said, "then get out. I'm done funding delusions." Mom opened her mouth, closed it, turned away. Danny leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. I knelt slowly and gathered what was left of my camera into my hands. The lens was cracked. The screen was shattered. But somehow the memory card was still in place. I held it like a broken heart and whispered more to myself than anyone else. "I will go, but someday you'll come looking for me." No one stopped me as I walked to my room and packed a bag. No one asked where I would go, and no one, not even my mother, told me to stay. I didn't take much with me: a backpack, some clothes, a few snacks from the pantry, my old laptop with the flickering screen, and of course what was left of my camera, shattered but still mine. The memory card was tucked in my wallet like a secret no one could steal. As I zipped up the bag, I heard footsteps outside my room. I thought for a second maybe someone had come to stop me. A hand on my shoulder, a whispered, "Wait, don't go." But it was just the sound of Danny walking past, humming to himself like nothing had happened. I stepped out of my room and into the hallway I'd grown up in. The photos on the walls blurred as I walked past them. Family vacations, Danny's graduation, a few baby pictures of me that somehow vanished the older I got. I paused by one frame. It was the 4 of us at the Grand Canyon. I must have been 10. I was squinting into the sun, hand raised in a wave, while Danny was on Dad's shoulders, the center of it all. Even back then, I knew where I stood. Dad was in his office, door half open. I could hear the clatter of his keyboard, the ticking of his expensive desk clock. He didn't look up when I walked in, not until I said quietly, "I'm leaving now." He turned, slowly, as if he was expecting a last-minute apology. "I'm not coming back," I added. He stood up, walked around the desk. "You always were dramatic. You'll be back when you run out of gas money." I took a breath. My heart thudded like it wanted to run out ahead of me. "No," I said, "I won't." He narrowed his eyes. "You're throwing away your life. For what? Wolves? Trees?" "For peace," I said. "For myself." A silence stretched between us. He didn't understand, and I knew he never would. He lived in a world where value came with a paycheck and worth was decided at the dinner table with resumes and title drops. Not quiet, not instinct, not soul. "You'll regret this," he said, voice sharp like steel. I smiled, not out of spite, but clarity. "One day," I said, "you'll come looking for me. Maybe not with kindness, maybe not with love, but you'll need something only I have." His laugh was bitter. "I doubt it." I turned toward the door. "Rachel." I paused, hoping, against all logic, that there might be softness in the way he said my name, but all he said was, "Don't expect help when it all falls apart." I nodded. "I won't." My mom was in the kitchen again, pretending to stir a pot of soup that had long since stopped simmering. She glanced up as I passed through the doorway. Her eyes were glassy, but her mouth stayed shut. I waited, just a second, gave her the chance. She looked down. I walked out. The screen door creaked behind me and slammed a little too hard. The sky was starting to turn gold. That soft hour when everything looks like a painting. I stood at the edge of the driveway, one foot on gravel, one on pavement. No one came after me. It was over. I walked away with everything broken except the thing they could never touch: my sense of direction. The first night away from home, I slept on the floor of a room that smelled like mold and regret. It was a sublet above a hardware store, the kind of place where the walls were thin, the light bulbs flickered, and the pipes moaned like they were haunted. But it was mine, and it was quiet. I didn't tell anyone where I went. Not my mother, not even the 2 friends from college who used to say, "Call if you ever need anything," but somehow never meant it. I didn't want pity. I wanted to stand on my own feet, even if they were blistered. The first job I found was delivering pizzas. It paid $12 an hour plus tips, which mostly came in loose change and lukewarm thanks. My beat-up Toyota didn't have heat, and the brakes squeaked every time I turned a corner, but I memorized every shortcut in town and learned how to smile through exhaustion. One night, I delivered to a house with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the harbor. The woman who answered wore silk pajamas and barely glanced at me. "I used to shoot houses like this," I said out loud to no one as I walked back to my car. The second job was bussing tables at a seafood restaurant that reeked of fried oil and ambition. The manager called me Nature Girl and thought it was funny to make wolf jokes when he was bored. I laughed along. Sometimes that's what surviving looks like. I ate cheap ramen and lived on instant coffee. I wore the same 2 pairs of jeans on rotation and learned how to stretch a $20 grocery run into a week of meals. My old laptop wheezed every time it turned on, and the space heater in my room gave out on day 5. Still, I didn't complain. I kept my memory card in a tin box under the bed like it was sacred. Because in a way, it was. Proof that I could still see beauty in the world, even when I had nothing. Sometimes after work, I'd go sit in the park at the edge of town, even in the cold. I'd stare at the trees and pretend I was back on the mountain, the wind at my back, camera in hand, waiting for the moment the world would show me something worth keeping. That version of me, muddy boots, wild heart, felt far away, but not gone. I started carrying the broken camera in my bag like a charm. The body was cracked, but the shutter button still moved. Sometimes I'd hold it up to my eye and pretend it still worked, frame the world through the lens and whisper, "Someday." Someday wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about remembering who I was before their voices got too loud. The thing about falling is that it strips you down. Not just your bank account or your pride, but your illusions. I had nothing left but grit and instinct, and strangely, that was enough. Because when you've been erased from your own home, you either disappear completely or you start rewriting yourself. And I wasn't going to disappear. I used to think learning only happened in classrooms. Turns out it happens in libraries that smell like dust and stale coffee. It happens on YouTube at 2 a.m. with your laptop balanced on a pillow and the screen flickering like it's about to give up on you. And sometimes it happens on a freezing trail at sunrise when your fingers are too numb to click the shutter. That winter, I taught myself how to be a photographer all over again. I checked out books with cracked spines and dog-eared pages, manuals on lighting, composition, animal tracking, field notes from old-school nature explorers who didn't have drones or filters, just patience and boots. I stayed up nights watching tutorials, taking notes in a spiral notebook I'd stolen from the pizza shop's supply closet. My camera was broken, but my eye wasn't. So I started borrowing equipment from a local university's community lab. They didn't know I wasn't a student. I just smiled, nodded, and kept quiet. I used whatever gear I could get my hands on, most of it old, scratched, temperamental. But it clicked, and clicking meant I was alive again. Every Saturday, I'd wake up at dawn and head to the state forest 2 towns over. I knew the rangers by name. They thought I was eccentric, harmless, a little too eager. They weren't wrong. Sometimes I waited for hours to get a single shot. A fox pawing at fresh snow, a deer blinking at the wind, squirrels mid-leap between bare branches. But my favorite moments weren't the ones I captured. They were the ones I almost missed, like the way frost curled along the edges of a leaf, or the first breath a squirrel takes after surviving a hawk's near miss, the quiet thud of snow falling from a high branch, or the low echo of an owl somewhere just out of sight. The forest became my church, my sanctuary, the only place I didn't feel like I was failing. No one asked for credentials out there. No one called me a disappointment. There were no resumes in the trees, no job titles in the river. Just light and time, and the slow reassembly of a girl trying to remember who she used to be before her dreams were mocked to pieces. I still worked at night, restaurant shifts, odd jobs, even cleaning office buildings after hours, but the forest was where I felt awake. And slowly, the images started to change. At first, they were shaky, out of focus, too dark. But each weekend, they got better. A little sharper, a little braver. I began to understand how to use light like a whisper, not a spotlight. How to wait, really wait, for the right moment instead of forcing one. I started trusting my gut more than my settings, because sometimes instinct is the best aperture you've got. I didn't post anything yet. Not online, not even to my private gallery. I was still rebuilding, still raw. But I knew, quietly, stubbornly, that I was onto something. That I had something to say. Something real. And I'd learned that some of the best stories don't come from people who were handed a spotlight. They come from the ones who had to find light in the dark. The moment that changed everything didn't come with fireworks. It came in the form of an email, buried in a spam folder between ads for weight loss pills and free cruise scams. Subject line, "Your fox photo. Is it yours?" I almost deleted it, but something told me to look. There it was, a link to a nature forum I didn't even remember signing up for. Someone had reposted one of my early shots, a mother fox carrying her injured kit across a shallow creek. I'd uploaded it weeks ago, half hoping someone might notice, and now it had thousands of views, hundreds of comments. Raw, instinctual, this is the kind of work that reminds me why I became a conservationist. This image made me cry. Thank you for seeing this and sharing it. I want to show this to my students. Where can I find the photographer? My hands trembled. Not because I thought I was famous. I wasn't. I still had to clock in for my dishwashing shift that night and catch the bus with people who never smiled. But for the first time, strangers were seeing what I saw, feeling what I felt. And that was enough to light a fire I thought I'd buried. I wrote back to the email. The sender turned out to be a junior editor at a small environmental magazine based in Oregon. She'd stumbled across the post during a late-night scroll and wanted to know if I had more work. "We're doing a winter wildlife issue," she said. "Would you be interested in contributing a photo and a short reflection?" It wasn't National Geographic, but it also wasn't nothing. I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. For the next 3 days, I obsessed over every word of that reflection. I wrote and rewrote, deleted whole paragraphs, started over twice. I wasn't just trying to sound smart. I was trying to sound true, trying to distill the feeling of standing alone in the woods, breath fogging the lens, watching a mother fox risk everything for her baby. In the end, I kept it simple. Sometimes the wild teaches us what family forgets, how to protect, how to be gentle, how to carry someone else even when we're breaking. When the issue came out, they mailed me a copy. I remember holding it like it might disappear. My name was there in print. Not big, not bold, but real. They even sent me a small check, just enough to cover a week's groceries and some new gloves for hiking. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the proof. Proof that my work mattered. That I mattered. I bought a $30 used tripod that same day. It wobbled a little, but it stood. Just like me. That night, on my walk home from the restaurant, I passed a bookstore that had the magazine in its window. My photo, my fox, was facing the street. A man walked by, glanced at it, then paused. He leaned in closer, smiled, took a picture with his phone. He didn't know me, would probably never know me. But he saw something I created and decided it was worth keeping. And in that small, quiet moment, I felt seen in a way my own family had never allowed. The idea came to me during a thunderstorm. I was sitting on the floor wrapped in a blanket, drinking instant coffee from a chipped mug. The rain outside was relentless, drumming against the roof like it had something urgent to say. And maybe it did. I opened my laptop, stared at the blinking cursor on a blank document, and thought, what if I stopped hiding? Not just my photos, not just my voice. What if I actually let people in? That's how Wild Spirit was born. I didn't have a plan, just a name that felt like home and a belief that the wild had something to teach all of us. I started uploading photos, slowly at first. Wolves in fog, pine trees bending in the wind, mushrooms catching golden light. But more than that, I shared the story behind each shot. What I saw, what I felt, why I pressed the shutter when I did. I didn't use fancy words, I just told the truth. The followers came in like snow, quiet, steady. 10 became 50, then 100. Most of them were strangers. A few were photographers. Some were teachers, park rangers, people who said they hadn't stepped into the woods in years but missed the silence. I got messages that stunned me. Your photos remind me of the woods behind my childhood home. I showed this to my daughter. She asked if we could go hiking together. I haven't felt peace in months. Your page helps. Every time I read one, I sat a little straighter. And then came the request that changed everything. A woman named Lila messaged me. Have you ever done a talk? Would you consider hosting a small meetup in person? Nothing fancy, just nature lovers, your photos, a place to breathe. At first, I wanted to say no. Who would show up? Who would care? But something inside me whispered, say yes, just once. So I posted the invite, an outdoor meetup at a state park, bring your own snacks, dress for mud. 5 people came. 5 total strangers with folding chairs and open hearts. One man brought his teenage son. Another woman wore binoculars around her neck and told me she'd been a birder since before I was born. We sat in a circle on damp grass while the sun dipped low and the trees caught fire with gold. I told them the story behind the fox photo and about the camera my father broke and how sometimes you have to lose everything to find the parts of yourself that matter. No one interrupted. No one judged. A woman with silver hair wiped her eyes and said, I wish I'd had your courage when I was your age. A long silence followed, and for once, it wasn't awkward. It was sacred. I didn't realize I needed that moment until I was in it. 5 people listening, really listening, like my voice had weight and warmth, like it belonged. When we stood to leave, the teenager asked if I'd do it again. I smiled and said, yeah, I think I will. That night, as I packed up my tripod and zipped my jacket, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not just hope, belonging, the kind you don't need permission for, the kind you build with your own hands. It had been 8 months since anyone in my family said my name. Not a text, not a missed call, nothing. I'd stopped checking. I'd stopped waiting. By then, Wild Spirit had grown past what I ever imagined. I had a part-time contract with a small eco-gear brand. Nothing glamorous, just enough to cover bills and save a little. People were buying my prints. I was being asked to speak at schools, community events, even a small photography panel upstate. For the first time in my life, I was standing on my own. And I liked the view. Then the phone rang. Unknown number, area code from back home. I stared at it for a second too long. My body knew before my brain did, that tight pull in the stomach, that voice that said, don't answer. But I did. Rachel. That voice, clipped, familiar, still sharp, even when trying to sound soft. Dad? I said. A beat of silence. Then a sigh, the kind people give when they're about to ask for something they know they shouldn't. I just wanted to say I've been meaning to reach out. I saw that article about you. The wolves, the forest work. You've done well for yourself. I waited. I didn't say thank you. I didn't fall for the bait. He cleared his throat. Listen, this isn't easy to say, but Danny's in trouble. Some business deal went bad. He borrowed more than he should have, and now, well, we're in a bit of a crisis. There it was. The reason. Not love, not pride, not reconciliation. Need. I said nothing. Just listened. That old ache crept in. Familiar, cruel. But I stayed quiet. We need a loan, $120,000, just to keep things from collapsing. I wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate. You're doing well, right? People online seem to think so. I closed my eyes. Let his words fall like hail. The thing is, there was a time I would have done it. Transferred every penny I had. Sold my camera. Moved back in. Begged to be seen. But that version of me died the day he shattered my lens and told me to get out. Rachel? He asked again. Are you there? I finally spoke. My voice was even, almost too calm. I'm here. We just need a little help. For family. That's all I'm asking. Family? The word felt sour. I need time to think, I said. Another pause, like he wanted to push but wasn't sure how far he could go. We both knew the balance had shifted. Okay, he said. I'll wait for your call. He hung up without saying goodbye. I stared at the wall for a long time after that. My tea went cold beside me. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like it was whispering secrets I couldn't quite hear. I replayed the call, the timing, the tone. Not once did he say sorry for the camera, for kicking me out, for watching me walk away without a second glance. It was like none of it had happened, like my silence had erased his cruelty. But I remembered, every word, every bruise that wasn't on skin but still left marks. I opened my notebook, the one where I wrote letters I never sent, and I wrote a new line. Not everyone who shares your blood is your family. Then I sat back. And I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt tired. Tired of being the solution to other people's chaos. Tired of being contacted only when someone wanted something. The next day, I sent a message. Simple, short, clear. I'm sorry, but I can't help you. No explanation, no apology, because peace doesn't need permission. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was angry, though maybe I was, but because something in me had shifted. Like an old wound had been reopened, not bleeding, just exposed to air again. I sat by my window with my laptop, the one I nearly threw out 3 times but never could. The file was still there, tucked away in a folder I'd labeled home//before. I hadn't opened it in over a year, but now I clicked play. The screen lit up with grainy footage. I'd forgotten I'd hit record that day. Maybe part of me knew I'd need the proof, not for anyone else, but for myself. To remember that it wasn't just in my head. There I was, standing in the kitchen, mud on my boots, camera in my hand. My father's voice boomed through the speakers. Chasing animals isn't a job, it's a joke. The sound of plastic shattering. The silence after. And then my voice, barely a whisper. I'll go. But someday you'll come looking for me. I paused the video there. My hand was over my mouth, not from shock but from memory. I remembered how my chest felt like it was caving in, how I'd held my breath, hoping someone, anyone, would speak up for me. But no one did. Watching it now, I wasn't crying, I wasn't shaking, I just felt tired. Old, in a way only betrayal can make you feel. I closed the laptop and pulled out my journal, the one with pine trees sketched on the cover and dirt smudges on the corners. It had followed me through every phase of starting over. And I wrote, "We don't get to choose the people we come from, but we do get to choose the people we become." Then another line, "I am not their scapegoat. I am not their wallet. I am not their backup plan." I let the pen hover for a moment. I forgive them, not to let them in, but to let myself out. I'd spent so long trying to earn love by being useful, by being quiet, by giving, and giving, and giving. But I was done bleeding for people who never brought bandages. The next morning, I brewed coffee and stared out at the frost-covered street. My phone buzzed once, a text from an unknown number. "Dad, we're waiting on your response. I know you're busy, but Danny is your brother. This isn't about pride, it's about family. Family, that word again." I picked up my phone and typed one word. No. I stared at it for a long time before hitting send. But I hit it. Not out of spite, out of freedom, because sometimes no isn't rejection, it's protection. It's drawing a line that says, I love myself enough not to walk back into a fire just because the house it's burning down is the one I grew up in. I turned off my phone after that, took a walk. The woods near my apartment were thin, mostly scrub pines and frostbitten grass, but the wind still sounded like home. I sat on a fallen log and closed my eyes. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel guilt, just space and silence. The good kind. I was adjusting the lighting in my tiny studio space when I heard the knock. Not a gentle one, not the kind you hear from a delivery driver or a curious passerby. This one was sharp, deliberate, and heavy with intent. I opened the door and froze. Standing in front of me were all three of them. My father in his wool coat, jaw tight, my mother half hidden behind him, clutching her purse like it might float away, and Danny, arms crossed, sunglasses pushed up on his head like he thought this was a vacation. I didn't move. Can we come in? My father asked, already stepping forward like it wasn't a question. No, I said, standing in the doorway. You can talk from here. He blinked, clearly not expecting that. Danny scoffed. Seriously? You're gonna make us have this conversation on the sidewalk like we're strangers? You said it yourself, I replied. I'm not family. I'm just someone you call when you need a bailout. My mother looked down. My father's face hardened. I raised you better than this, he said. No, I said calmly. You raised me to stay silent. That's not the same thing. There was a long pause. The wind picked up behind them, tugging at the edge of my father's coat. Danny stepped forward. You think you're above us now? Because you post pictures of trees online? Because some strangers clapped for you? Let me remind you, Rachel, everything you are came from this family. I felt something inside me twist, but I didn't let it show. Everything I am, I said slowly, came from choosing not to become like you. He laughed. You're being dramatic. No, I said, my voice steady. I'm being honest. For once. My father spoke again, sharper this time. This isn't just about you, Rachel. Your brother's in trouble. This family needs to stick together. We don't abandon each other. I stared at him, truly stared. You're saying that to me. The daughter you threw out for not being like Danny, the one you called a joke, the one you haven't spoken to in almost a year. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I took a breath. Where were you when I had to choose between groceries and rent? When my camera shattered and I had to borrow broken gear from strangers just to keep going? Where were you when I was standing alone in a forest at 5 a.m., freezing, hoping the sun would rise so I could get one photo worth selling for $20? No one answered. You know what's funny? I said. You didn't come here because you care. You came here because I have something you want. Danny rolled his eyes. God, you are so full of yourself. I turned to my mother. She hadn't said a word. Mom, I said gently, why are you here? She looked up at me, eyes glassy, voice barely above a whisper. Because he made me come. There it was, the quiet truth that hurt more than the shouting. I see, I said. I stepped back and pointed to the doorframe. This place, my work, my peace, it's not open to people who only show up when they're desperate. I didn't shut the door on this family, you did. My father stared at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I always was. He turned without another word and started down the sidewalk. Danny shook his head and followed. No goodbye, no apology. But my mother lingered. I wish things were different, she said softly. I nodded. Me too. Then I closed the door. And this time, I locked it. Not out of fear, out of love. For myself. The first comment came in just after midnight. I was reviewing photos from a recent hike, an elk framed by golden mist, when a notification pinged across my screen. Wow, didn't know you were the kind of person who'd abandon your own brother. Guess your pretty photos cover up a pretty ugly soul. I blinked, confused. Then another. Fake wilderness princess. Traded her family for followers. Typical. My stomach dropped. I opened my Wild Spirit page and scrolled through the latest post. The photo was fine. The caption was neutral. But the comments were different this time. Angry, personal. And they were multiplying. I followed a few of them to the source. A Reddit thread, then a Twitter post, then a burner account on Instagram. No profile picture, brand new, 3 posts all targeting me. The caption read, "The truth about Rachel Linwood, Don't let the nature goddess act fool you. She's heartless, manipulative, and cut off her own family after they supported her for years. Ask her about the money. Ask her about the lies. There were screenshots, heavily cropped and out of context, bits of old texts, twisted captions, even a blurry childhood photo of me and Danny in the backyard, now turned into a mockery. The account name? @truth_about_Rachel. It didn't take a genius to figure out who was behind it. Danny always did know how to spin a story, especially when he was the victim. He painted me as the cold, selfish daughter who got famous and forgot where she came from, the one who owed her family and turned her back when they needed her most. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to. I wanted to scream, to post screenshots of my own, to remind the world that this was the same man who watched silently as my father smashed my dreams, who never once checked if I was safe after being kicked out. But I didn't. Instead, I watched. I watched the comments pile up. I watched the shares increase. And then came the email I'd been dreading. Hi, Rachel. We regret to inform you that due to recent concerns surrounding your public image, we'll be pausing our collaboration for the foreseeable future. We appreciate your work and wish you the best. It was from one of my gear sponsors. A small one, but still. It stung. Not because of the money, because of what it confirmed. People believed him. Somewhere out there, people who'd never met me decided I was a villain based on a handful of lies dressed up as family truth. That night, I shut my laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. The kind of dark that seeps in, not just around you, but inside you. I thought about deleting everything, walking away, letting Danny have the last word just to be free from the noise. But then, I remembered that morning in the forest, long before any of this, the way the wolf pack had moved through the fog, silent and sure, the way the alpha didn't growl or bark or snarl, but simply stood its ground. Not loud, not vicious, just unshaken. And I realized something. I didn't need to explain myself to strangers, but I did need to protect myself, from my own blood if I had to, because silence can be strength, but sometimes silence needs to be broken. I didn't leave my apartment for 2 days, not because I was afraid of anyone showing up at my door. No one from the internet knew where I lived, and my family sure as hell didn't have the guts to face me again in person. It wasn't fear, it was grief. Not the loud kind with wailing and broken dishes, the quiet kind. The kind that sits next to you on the couch while your tea goes cold and your inbox fills with strangers' opinions about your worth. I scrolled through the hate until my eyes blurred. People who'd never met me dissecting my life like it was a tabloid headline. The irony was cruel. I'd spent years invisible to the people who should have seen me, and now I was being seen by thousands in the worst possible light. I didn't respond. Not to the comments. Not to the emails, not to the concerned messages from old classmates who suddenly remembered my name, but the silence didn't bring peace this time. It felt like defeat. And then came the photo that changed everything. It was a repost of one of my earliest shots, a wolf mid-stride through the snow, breath visible, fur lit by dawn. Someone had captioned it, "This image gave me hope during chemo. I don't care what they say about her, I'll follow her work forever." I don't know why that message broke me open, but it did. I cried. Not from shame, not from rage, but from the reminder that I wasn't just a target. I was a voice, a lens, a story that mattered. And I wasn't going to let someone else finish it for me. That night I opened my laptop, not to defend myself, not to argue point by point with lies. I opened a new document, titled it, "The Sound of the Silent Wolf." I wrote one line. Sometimes the only way to be heard is to stop whispering. Then I closed the file and pulled out the business card tucked inside my notebook. It had been sitting there for months. I met the woman at a conference, small-time civil attorney who specialized in online harassment and defamation. We'd talked briefly over lunch and she'd said, "If anyone ever tries to come for you, I hope you call me." I sent her an email. The subject line was simple, "Ready to talk." I wasn't planning revenge. This wasn't about payback. It was about reclaiming something that had always been mine. My name. The next morning, she replied. We set a meeting for the following week. In the meantime, I went back to the woods. I needed the trees. I needed the sound of wind moving through pine needles, the crunch of frozen leaves under boots, the kind of silence that doesn't accuse or demand. It just holds space. That day, I didn't bring my camera. I didn't need to capture anything. I just needed to remember. That no one gets to rewrite my story without my permission. That family doesn't give you the right to wound someone and call it love. That silence can be grace. But sometimes, grace wears boots and carries legal documents. By the time I walked back to my apartment, I felt lighter. Not because anything had been fixed, but because I'd chosen to stop being the hunted and start being the one who stands. The office was smaller than I expected. No marble floors, no wall of certificates, just one desk, 2 chairs, and a ficus plant that had seen better days. But it felt right. The lawyer's name was Janelle. Mid-40s, soft-spoken but sharp-eyed, like someone who knew how to take a punch and then file paperwork that could flatten the person who threw it. She greeted me with tea instead of coffee and asked no unnecessary questions. I liked her instantly. "So," she said, opening a notepad, "you ready to stop being quiet?" I nodded. She'd already seen the screenshots. The fake accounts, the posts and threads and digital venom. She'd read every caption, studied every lie, highlighted every phrase Danny had carefully twisted to ruin me. "You've got a solid case," she said. "He named you directly, made false claims, damaged your livelihood. That's defamation, clear as day." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "It's not just the words," I said. "It's the way he made me feel invisible again, like he still thinks he can narrate my life better than I can." Janelle smiled. "Then let's give him a story he can't control." She explained the steps. A formal cease and desist, a civil suit for defamation and damages, a public statement if I chose to make one later. "We won't come out swinging," she said, "but we'll make it clear. You're not backing down." I didn't flinch. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something I hadn't felt since the day I first held a camera. Agency. We filed the paperwork that week. My hands trembled when I signed the final document, but my signature came out steady. A few days later, Danny was served. He didn't reply directly. Not with words, at least. But the burner accounts went quiet. The threads disappeared. The anonymous posts stopped multiplying. Silence. Not the kind that comforts, the kind that confirms guilt. I knew this wouldn't fix everything. My reputation had taken hits. A few brands had ghosted me. Some people still believed the worst. But that didn't matter now, because I'd done something I never thought I'd have the courage to do. I stood up, not to get back at him, but to get back to myself. I wasn't just a nature photographer. I wasn't just a girl who liked wolves and silence and wide open space. I was someone who could look harm in the face and say, "Not this time." That night I took a walk through my neighborhood, past the diner where I used to bus tables, past the bookstore that had once displayed my magazine cover in the window, and I whispered to the wind, "I'm not scared of them anymore. Not of the trolls, not of the lies, not of the people who once called themselves family, because once you realize your voice matters, it becomes very hard to stay silent." Courtrooms are strange places. They're quiet in a loud kind of way. Like everyone's waiting for something to explode, but no one wants to be the one to light the match. I sat at the plaintiff's table in my cleanest jeans and a blazer I borrowed from a friend. No makeup, no gloss, just me. Real, tired, ready. Danny was already there when I walked in. He didn't look at me. He kept checking his phone like he had somewhere more important to be, like he wasn't sitting in front of a judge because he decided to turn my life into clickbait. His lawyer looked like he belonged in a commercial. Polished, smiling like nothing was personal. But it was. This wasn't just about slander. It was about control. It was about the years Danny spent living like the golden child while I was told to be quiet, be helpful, be less. And now here we were. The hearing wasn't long. Civil suits rarely are. Just a few hours of statements, evidence, cross-examinations. I didn't cry when I took the stand. I didn't raise my voice. I just told the truth. I told them how I built Wild Spirit from scratch, how I struggled after being kicked out, how every partnership and opportunity was something I earned, not inherited. I showed them the screenshots, the fake accounts traced back to Danny's email, the sponsorship I lost, the messages that came flooding in, death threats, insults, strangers telling me I'd failed as a daughter and a woman. Janelle asked one last question before I stepped down. "What would justice look like for you, Rachel?" I paused. "Accountability," I said. "Not revenge. Just acknowledgement that what he did was wrong and that I didn't imagine it." Danny didn't speak in his defense. His lawyer did all the talking, blaming miscommunication and family tensions. At one point, he called the posts emotionally reactive but not malicious. The judge didn't buy it. She ruled by the book, a public retraction, a formal apology, damages to be paid, enough to cover the sponsorship losses and legal costs. But it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the moment the judge turned to Danny and said, "What you did was not only cruel, it was cowardly." He didn't flinch, he just nodded. His apology was read in court, hollow, coached. But it existed, and that was enough for now. After the gavel dropped, I didn't feel victorious. I felt clean, like I had scrubbed something dark off my skin that had been sitting there for years. Danny passed me in the hallway as we were leaving, still didn't look at me. But my mother was there, standing near the elevator. She didn't come into the courtroom, didn't sit on either side. Just watched from the doorway like she always had, close enough to witness, never close enough to intervene. Our eyes met. She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it, and I walked right past her. Because forgiveness doesn't always come with reunions. Sometimes it just comes with release. I didn't plan to make a video. I wasn't chasing closure or clicks or some cinematic "I told you so." But a week after the hearing, I found myself sitting in my studio, camera on, hands in my lap, staring into the lens like it might understand me better than most people ever had. It was a cold morning, the kind where the light filters through the window soft and silver, and the world feels still, like it's waiting for something honest. So I hit record. No script, no edits, just me. "My name is Rachel Linwood," I said. "Some of you know me from my work with wildlife. Some of you have followed me for the past year as I've shared photos of wolves, rivers, trees, silence. But today I'm sharing something else." I told them everything, not the tabloid version, not the social media war, the real story about a camera that was once my lifeline, shattered on a kitchen floor. About being told to leave home because I dared to want something different. About starting over with nothing but a backpack, a cracked lens, and a stubborn belief that peace was worth chasing. I talked about the lies, the pain, the public backlash, and I talked about the courtroom, how I didn't fight to win. I fought to be heard. Then I paused, looked directly into the lens. "Forgiveness," I said, "isn't about letting someone hurt you again. It's not about pretending it didn't matter. It's not even about making peace with them. Sometimes it's just about letting go of the hope that the past could have been different, and choosing, quietly, firmly, not to carry it forward." I let the silence sit there for a moment. Then I smiled. Not the polished kind. Not the press conference kind. The kind that comes when you finally tell the truth and realize the sky didn't fall. I closed the video with one last sentence. If you've ever walked away from someone you love because staying would have meant losing yourself, just know you're not selfish. You're brave. I posted it without watching it back, turned off my phone, made tea, stepped outside and watched a redbird land on the railing like it had been listening the whole time. When I came back inside, the comments had already started pouring in. Hundreds of them. Thousands by nightfall. I thought I was the only one. Thank you for saying what I've never had the words to say. My daughter needed this. I needed this. There were no trolls this time. Only truth. Only connection. Only people who knew what it was like to choose freedom over obligation, clarity over chaos. And love, not the kind that demands silence, but the kind you build inside yourself, one boundary at a time. The forest didn't ask me any questions. It didn't want to know how the hearing went or how many likes my video got or if I was okay. It just let me be. Which, after everything, felt like the most radical kind of kindness. I drove upstate before sunrise, camera packed but untouched in the back seat. I hadn't planned to shoot anything. I just needed to be somewhere that didn't echo with anyone's opinions. Somewhere no one knew my name. It was colder than I expected. The kind of cold that bites your fingertips and wakes up old memories you didn't even know were still sleeping. I followed a narrow trail that led through fir and birch, frost crunching beneath my boots. My breath came out in clouds. There were no signs, no fences, no man-made sounds, just wind and branches and the occasional bird call breaking the stillness. I kept walking until the trail disappeared. Then I stepped off, not aimlessly, intuitively. I'd done this 100 times before, chasing light, chasing silence, chasing something I couldn't always name. Eventually I found a clearing, wide open, surrounded by evergreens like quiet sentinels. There was a log near the center, worn flat by time. I sat down, pulled my knees to my chest, and just breathed. I stayed like that for a long time. No camera, no journal, no phone, just the forest and me. And it was enough. I don't know how much time passed before I saw it, a flicker of movement to my left. I turned my head slowly, heart quiet but alert. There, stepping out from the trees, was a lone wolf, white as snow, lean and poised, not fearful, not curious, just aware. Our eyes met. We didn't move. She stood still as a statue, breath visible, ears tilted forward like she was reading something in me I didn't know I was broadcasting. I didn't reach for my camera. Not because I didn't want to capture her, but because I didn't need to. This wasn't for anyone else. It wasn't for a feed or a frame. It was a moment meant only for now. Eventually she turned and slipped back into the trees, vanishing like mist. And I whispered, "Thank you." Because something in her stillness mirrored mine. Because in that brief, sacred exchange, I felt fully human again. Not because I was seen, but because I wasn't judged. I sat there long after she left. The sun rose higher, the frost melted. A crow flew overhead, calling to something I couldn't see. And in that silence, I realized something. I didn't win anything. I didn't beat my family or prove the internet wrong. But I was whole. Not healed, not perfect, but whole. And that was more than I had ever been. When I finally stood and made my way back to the trail, I felt the weight of the past year settle gently on my shoulders, not as a burden, but as a reminder. Of what I'd carried. Of what I'd left behind. And of what I would never again give away. Myself. I haven't been back to that house in years, but sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still feel the chill of the tile floor in the kitchen. I can still smell my father's cologne, sharp, expensive, calculated. And I can still hear his voice echoing down the hallway, always firm, always final. I don't know what the house looks like now. I hear it's quiet. Too quiet. My mother moved out 6 months after the hearing. She didn't tell me. I found out from a neighbor who still follows my page and sends me photos of wildflowers from the edge of their yard. "Your mom packed up in the middle of a Wednesday," the message read. Didn't say much, just left. I wasn't surprised. She was always the one who stayed too long in rooms that made her smaller. And Danny? I don't ask. I don't check. The noise he created finally choked itself out. And I learned long ago that silence, when chosen, can be a kind of mercy. But my father, Martin Linwood, I hear he still lives in that big house at the edge of town, the one with the red door that used to stick in the summer, the one with the family photo above the fireplace. Last I heard, the frame's still there, but the glass is cracked. I imagine him standing in that living room some mornings, holding a coffee cup he doesn't finish, staring at that photo like it's a stranger's life. Maybe he notices the way my face has started to fade, the way time slowly washes out the ones who leave. Maybe not. He was never one for noticing quiet things, but I wonder if he hears the silence now. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that hums like a warning, the kind that creeps under doorways and into corners and sits with you at dinner when no one else is there. I wonder if he thinks about the day he threw my camera on the floor, if he remembers the sound it made, if it's louder now that the house is empty. I don't wish him pain. I don't wish him anything, really. Some people think forgiveness means returning to the place where you were hurt and offering your heart again. I don't believe that. Forgiveness, for me, has been learning how to carry his name without carrying his shadow. It's knowing I didn't become bitter. I became free. But I do hope in the deepest, quietest part of me that he knows what he lost. Not out of spite, but out of truth. He didn't just lose a daughter. He lost the chance to know the woman she became. The woman who stood in court with her head high. The woman who said no, even when it cracked something inside her. The woman who now wakes up in a cabin surrounded by trees, her camera by the window, her peace intact. Sometimes I think about writing him a letter. Not to reconnect, just to say I made it, but I don't. Because some letters are better left unwritten, some stories don't need a reply, and some endings are quiet. Just a man, alone in a house too big for his silence, looking at a photo that no longer looks back. I never imagined standing on a stage. Not like this. Not in a room filled with soft lights, polished shoes, and strangers who know my name, but not my story. The award is called Voice of Nature. Ironic, really, for someone who spent so long learning to use her own voice. I was told about it 2 weeks before the ceremony. A short email, professional, polite. We're pleased to inform you that your work has been selected for the 2025 Voice of Nature Award in recognition of your outstanding contribution to environmental storytelling and preservation. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I closed the laptop and went for a walk. Not because I wasn't honored, but because I needed to remember why I ever picked up a camera in the first place. It was never about applause. It was about paying attention to the things the world forgets to see. And tonight, as I sat in the front row of that hall, dressed in the same black boots I wore on the mountain trail last fall, I felt like I was watching a version of my life from the outside. They showed a montage before calling my name. Clips from my Wild Spirit channel. Still shots of wolves, frozen rivers, a bear in mid-roar. A girl with tangled hair standing barefoot in a stream, eyes lifted toward the sky. I recognized the footage, but I barely recognized the girl. Not because she'd changed, but because she'd finally come home to herself. They said nice things. A woman in a sleek blue dress read from a note card, quoting my captions, calling my work fierce yet tender, a reminder of what still matters. I listened. I smiled. And when they said my name, I stood. The room clapped. It was polite, then warm, then something more, something that settled into the air like gratitude, like respect. I walked to the stage slowly. Not to be dramatic, to be present. My boots echoed softly on the wooden steps. The lights were brighter than I expected, but they didn't bother me. I accepted the award with both hands. It was heavy, solid, real. They waited for me to speak. There was a microphone, a folded page on the podium in case I'd prepared remarks. I hadn't. Not because I didn't have words, but because some things are better left unspoken. I looked out across the room, faces blurred together. Some had tears in their eyes. Some just watched quietly. I gave them a small nod, a thank you without the sentence, and then I walked back down. No speech, no story, because I didn't need to explain how I got here. Everything I'd lost, everything I'd fought for, it was already in the photographs, in the silence between them, in the light that falls on wild things whether or not anyone's watching. Afterward, people approached me. A woman with silver hair said, "Your photo of the fox in the fog. It made me feel less alone." I squeezed her hand. A young man whispered, "I walked away from my family too. I didn't know I was allowed to." I looked him in the eye and said, "You are." But mostly, I just stood to the side and let the room move around me. I didn't need to be the center. I just needed to be. Later that night, as I placed the award on my shelf, next to a pine cone from my first solo hike and a feather I once found in a creek, I whispered to myself, this wasn't about being seen. It never was. It was about seeing and choosing every day to keep showing up for the beauty that asks for nothing in return. The last video I posted on Wild Spirit didn't have a title, no behind the scenes, no lessons from the trail, just an image. A slow, silent pan across the tops of snow-dusted pines. The camera moved like breath, steady, patient, reverent. Then came the voiceover, mine. No background music, just my words, and the forest listening. I used to think success meant proving something to someone, proving I was worthy, proving I belonged, proving I wasn't the disappointment they said I'd become. The video cut to a fox leaping over a frozen stream, mid-air, effortless. But now I know, success is quieter than that. Sometimes success is making it through the night without hating yourself. Sometimes it's being able to sit alone in a room and feel safe inside your own skin. And sometimes it's walking away from people you love, not because you stopped loving them, but because they stopped loving you in a way that was safe to stay. The screen shifted to a close-up, dew sliding off a leaf, catching a beam of light like a secret being passed from the earth to the sky. I paused for a moment in the narration, let the silence land. If you've ever been told you're selfish for needing space, or dramatic for needing truth, or ungrateful for drawing a boundary, let me tell you something they never did. You're not broken, you're brave. Then, a shot of a lone wolf turning its head toward the camera, eyes steady, unblinking, wild. You don't owe anyone access to your peace. You don't owe anyone the version of yourself that makes them comfortable. And healing, it's not always a sunrise. Sometimes it's a storm. Sometimes it's a long walk through the dark woods with no one but yourself to carry. But if you keep walking, if you stay true, you'll find the clearing. The video slowed. The camera lifted to catch a flock of birds rising at once, fluid, unscripted, free. I spoke the last words with calm certainty, not as a lesson, not as advice, just as truth. Success isn't about being understood by everyone, it's about no longer needing to be. It's about showing up for your own life, fully, even when no one's clapping, even when the people you wanted most to see you never did. Because the wild doesn't need permission to be beautiful, and neither do you. I let the video fade out on a single frame, a slow zoom into a forest path covered in gold light. The comments flooded in, more than I could count. I didn't respond to most of them. I didn't need to. This was never about audience, it was about honesty. The kind you speak aloud, not to change anyone's mind, but to stop betraying your own heart. I left the screen for the rest of the day, took a walk, picked up a rock from the stream and held it in my palm, watched a hawk trace circles above the treetops, and I thought about every version of me I had to outgrow. The girl who begged for approval, the woman who thought silence was strength, the daughter who thought love was something to earn. They all brought me here, but they weren't mine to carry anymore. Only this was, this stillness, this freedom, this life that no longer needed to be explained. There's a photo on the mantel in the old house, the same one that used to hang in the hallway when I was a teenager. 4 faces, smiling, frozen in time. If you look closely, you'll see that the smiles don't match the eyes. That's the kind of truth pictures can't hide forever. I haven't stepped foot in that house since the night I left. But someone sent me a picture of the living room recently. It was grainy, taken from a real estate listing. The house was up for sale, and there was my father, standing in the corner of the frame, alone. He wasn't the man I remembered. He looked older, smaller, like someone who had finally run out of people to talk over. His hands were in his pockets. His eyes were fixed on the wall where that photo still hung, even after all this time. The frame was chipped, the glass cloudy, and yet he was still looking at it. I wonder what he sees now. I wonder if, in the quiet of that house, when no one is left to argue or obey, he hears my voice, not raised in defiance, but steady, calm, saying no. Maybe he replays the moment I walked out with my camera in my hand and my name still my own. Maybe he understands finally that it wasn't rebellion. It was survival. I don't feel bitter when I think of him anymore. I don't feel much at all. Just a soft kind of knowing. Some people never say they're sorry. Some people never change. But silence has its own language, and sometimes the loudest apology is a man standing in a room too empty to echo. He's still my father. But I'm no longer his child, and that, somehow, is a peace I never thought I'd find. The ballroom was warmer than I expected, not from the chandeliers or the crowd, but from the quiet hum of something I hadn't felt in a long time, recognition without demand. I sat in the second row, holding my camera in my lap like an old friend. No speech in my pocket. No publicist whispering behind me, just me, dressed in black and earth tones, grounded, steady. When they called my name, I stood. I didn't rush. I didn't smile for the cameras. I just breathed. The applause was soft at first, then built slowly, not loud but full. Like people clapping not just for my work, but for something unspoken we all shared. A kind of resilience, a kind of return. I stepped onto the stage and was handed the award, smooth wood, etched metal, solid in my hands. I looked out over the room. People waited. There was a microphone, of course. A moment offered, but I had nothing to add. Not because I didn't care. Because everything I needed to say, I had already lived. I met their eyes row by row, gave a small nod. Then I stepped down. And in that silence I felt something shift. For years I thought proving my worth would come through big words or bold statements. But in that moment, I realized it had already come. In the photos, in the hikes, in the quiet choices to keep going when no one clapped. When I returned to my seat, someone squeezed my hand. I turned to see an older woman in a green shawl, eyes misty. "You didn't need to speak," she whispered. "We heard you." And I believed her. Because sometimes presence says more than performance. Because peace doesn't always walk in with a roar. Sometimes it enters quietly, camera in hand, and simply chooses to stay. The wind moved like breath across the field. Golden light spilled over the hills, soft as memory. I stood alone on the edge of the Thao Nguyen, camera raised, watching. There she was, the white wolf, still, watchful, unafraid. She didn't run when I stepped closer. She didn't flinch at the sound of the shutter. She simply stood there, calm and wild, bathed in the last light of day. Click. The sound was soft, almost sacred. In that moment, I felt no need to explain myself to the world, not as a daughter, not as a photographer, not even as a woman. I was simply Rachel, whole, free, and seen by the only witness that ever truly mattered: the land, the light, and myself. No dialogue followed, just the rustle of the wind in the grass, the steady breath of the wolf, the camera's final click. I lowered the lens, closed my eyes, and let the silence hold me. Then I smiled. Because I knew something now that I hadn't known before. The boundary between love and harm is not betrayal. It is love. Real love. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can say is no. To chaos, to cruelty, to anything that asks you to shrink so someone else can stay comfortable. If you're reading this, or watching this, wondering if you're allowed to walk away from pain dressed up as family, you are. You always were. And you're not alone. Share this story. Tell your own. And if no one's ever told you, let me be the first. You're not selfish. You're not broken. You are brave. And you are allowed to choose peace. Always. Fade to black.